So you just got done watching Mr. Clifford's video and got to see how I build a demand curve as well. I'm going to show you this graphic. This is going to be one that you want to come back to help you with today's assignment. And you'll see the same graphic on your supply instructions in a future lesson. We're going to just focus on the dark blue slide. And consider this like your little cheat sheet graphic for demand. What I got listed are the 5 shifters of demand, like Mr. Clifford introduced you to. You have the change in consumer income can cause the demand curve to shift. If you have more income coming in for buyers, then you're going to see an increase in demand. For example, stimulus checks being sent out by the US government right now during the coronavirus, going to cause a little bit of an increase in demand as consumers now have a bump in pay. And on the other hand, at the same time, those same consumers who are getting a little increase in demand may have just lost their jobs. And so jobs lost means lost wages, which could lead to a change in consumer income for the negatives. So we're looking at a decrease in their demand, or the curve shifting to the left. You have a change in consumer expectations can cause demand curves to increase or decrease, something that's going to happen in the future. You could have a change in the number of buyers in the market. And I think this one is really difficult for students at first because they think of, well, if a person doesn't want to buy it anymore, they're not a buyer in the market, but they are. When we talk about numbers of buyers in the market, we're not talking about whether kids, don't want to have that pop up again. We're not talking about people that want to or not want to buy something. We're talking about physical number of people. So when you look at my demand example, when I built the demand for A's in my class, one way that the demand curve would increase is if I brought in 30 new students and they placed bids on what they would be willing and able to pay for an A. Or if, say, 50 people found out they had a corrupt economics teacher who was selling A's and they didn't want to learn from that person anymore, they dropped the class, well, then we'd see a decrease in the demand for A's because we wouldn't have as many buyers in the market. They physically are no longer there. So that's an important distinction to make. Next one, we have consumer tastes or preferences, also advertising factors in here. And then the last one is the prices of related goods, complements versus substitutes. So a complementary good would be 2 products that go together. For example, a hot dog and a hot dog bun are complements to each other. Also, ketchup and hot dogs are complements to each other. Substitutes are things you would buy in place of each other. So going to the grocery store and getting apple juice or orange juice, they tend to be substitutes. If the price of orange juice went up by double, well, then I might substitute my preference for that and get apple juice instead if apple juice's price had remained constant. So these are the 5 shifters of demand. You're going to use this as you look through your example, think through your examples on your assignment today. So this is a sheet that I typically fill out with students in class. You can just follow along as I talk about it. We have 8 graphs here that are going to be presented to us, and in each graph, on the bottom, we're told what the market is for. At the top, we're given an event that is occurring or has occurred in the market or will occur. And we're going to analyze and figure out what's going to happen to demand for that product. Now, if it's one of the 5 shifters, like you saw in the previous graphic, we're going to have to draw an arrow to the right if the curve's increasing, or to the left if we think it's decreasing. There could be an example where the curve doesn't move at all, and that is if the price of the product itself is the only thing changing. It means our demand, or our willingness and ability to pay for the product, has not changed at all. The maximum amount we're willing to pay doesn't shift because the price does. All it means is we may not be willing to buy it anymore if it gets to be too expensive, above what our maximum amount was. For example, if you said $95 was the maximum you're willing and able to pay for an A, and I raised the price of an A from 75 to 100, that means you wouldn't buy the A anymore at that new price. So you're not changing your demand for it, right? You still had $95 as your maximum amount. If you went and shifted your demand for it and said, well, yeah, I'm going to shift my demand to 100, well, that means something of those shifters occurred. It was probably your taste or preference, or maybe there was some other event that caused you to increase the amount. But just the price shift alone did not cause a demand shift, and therefore it is movement. We'll see one example of those moving forward. So with T-bone steaks, we'll start there, and the price of beef is expected to rise next week. So the key there is expected. And remember, one of our shifters is expectations of the buyer. And so since that is the case, we're going to see an increase in demand because we expect beef to get more expensive. Buyers are going to want T-bones now compared to next week when they get to be more expensive. Here, now let's look at the next one, hamburger bun market. If we're told that the price of beef did rise, well, now we're looking at two goods that go hand in hand, right? You want to put beef inside of a hamburger bun. So we are going to see, oh yeah, I forgot. I'm going to write down expectations here for you. So that way you have the shifter. The price of beef rising means that it's going to be more expensive to buy hamburgers. So we have the price of a complementary good is changing. It's more expensive for hamburgers. So our demand for hamburger buns should decrease or shift to the left. So we'll draw an arrow to the left of the demand curve. And we draw a new demand curve then. Notice we're labeling it with the number 1 because the original curve has no number by it. The way that we like to do that as economists to show which the new curve is we put a number next to it. Next example, if we are looking at the market for snow shovels and the first snowstorm of the season occurs, well, we have a change in our taste or preference for shovels. We need it now. We didn't need it before the snowstorm, but now we do. So we're going to see the demand for snow shovels should increase as a result of that snowstorm. Now, may pause it here for a moment because you might think, wait a minute, in Minnesota, everybody's got a snow shovel. They don't have demand for them. Remember, we're not looking only at Minnesota. We could be talking about nationwide. And if you're living down in Alabama, you don't see snowstorms too often. And so if you get a big one, you may need to go get a shovel. Or some of us might just break their shovel at the end of a really heavy snow season out of sheer frustration, and now we need to go get a new one, and we put it off for the entire summer and fall. And so, yeah, we might need to go get a new shovel. Okay, the next one is sunscreen. And the event that we're given in the market for sunscreen as a buyer is that summer vacation begins. All right. So we're going to find the demand is going to increase for sunscreen because we're going to have students across the country that no longer have to be trapped inside of classrooms, except, of course, in this current situation is a little abnormal. But normally you'd have kids chomp at the bit to get outside. Now they can. So their preference for sunscreen is changing because they can use it more. So we're going to see an increase in demand. The curve is going to shift to the right. And so we draw a new curve to the right, label it with a D and a 1, and we're ready to move on to the next one because we had a change in preference. All right, so this one we have number 11. The market is for milk and the price of breakfast cereal increases. Milk and cereal are nice complements to each other. So if the price of one goes up, the demand for the other is going to go down. This actually just brought up a point that I was talking about with my wife this morning. We were watching on the news. There's a large outcry of gallons and gallons of milk being dumped out right now as a result of the coronavirus. One question that I posed to my wife when we were watching that is I said, it's interesting we're complaining about that because I wonder how many gallons of milk daily are dumped by Americans down the sink when they have cereal. So something to ponder there. Anyway, when we see that happening, we're seeing the price of a complement is changing, and so the demand for milk is going to decrease as people are buying less cereal, right? Cereal gets more expensive. We don't buy as much of it. We don't need as much milk to pour on our cereal and then later dump down the sink. So shift to the left, D1. Number 12, we have the market is orange juice, and what we're told is the price of orange juice rises. This is a tricky one. There's nothing in this example that's causing us to shift our demand for OJ. All that's happening is the price is changing. So on the side here, I'm going to draw, imagine this. You have an old price and you have a new price. So I guess we have to write this down here first. No shift, right? Just movement. So no shifters being met. There, better. Now, on the side, we're going to draw, imagine the old price is there, lower, right? P0, that's the original. And we have the price of OJ goes up. Now we have a new price that's up higher. So that's where the quantity demanded would be. We have movement. And this is showing a decrease, or not a decrease, but a rising price and the demand curve holding steady. We'd be decreasing the quantity demanded. Now we have apple juice and the price of OJ rises. Now it's the same event, but a different market, right? Apple juice and orange juice, they are substitutes for each other. So if OJ gets more expensive, we are going to substitute apple juice for it. So the demand for apple juice will likely increase. And so the demand curve is going to shift to the right. Increases are always to the right. Last example for graphing here, Tiger Woods creates a new fad, golf, and the market is golf balls. Let's imagine it's the Tiger Woods of 2005 when this worksheet that we're looking at was created. So Tiger was still awfully popular at that point. We would expect that our preference or taste for golf balls is going to increase. So we'll see the demand increase, which means it shifts to the right. There you go, label it as D1. And that is how you go about graphing these shifts. Next, we'll take you to the assignment and just give you some quick instructions on how to get started on that. So your assignment's called Demand Practice Part 1. You have some instructions here. It says identify the determinants of demand. That just means the shifters. Don't worry about worksheet 5B. We haven't done that. What we have talked about is how an increase is depicted on a graph when we have a shift in the demand curve, such as when it shifts upward to the right, it's indicating an increase in demand, and when the curve shifts to the left, it's indicating a decrease in demand. And the factors that result in the change, these are the shifters, the determinants of demand. Now, because of distance, we're not going to work as a team of 3 or 4. I'll just ask you to work solo, but use the chart that I helped you with in the video there with the shifters on it. For each shifter, I want you to indicate whether demand is going to increase or decrease and give you an explanation as to why. So, for example, if the population increases in a market, does that mean the demand is going to increase or decrease? Well, when the population grows, demand increases. So you put either an arrow up is fine or just an I, or you can write the whole word increase. And it just means that there's more people bidding for those items. Decreased population, you're going to find the opposite. So you'd have a decrease and explain why a decrease in population leads to a decrease in demand because you have less people bidding. So this is just walking you through the shifters and helping you really spell out whether each instance is creating an increase or decrease in demand. Quickly in your own words, why. Okay. What I will be grading when I look at your assignment is this portion here. You're given a scenario, just like we had in my example with the graphs. Now notice you don't have to graph it here. What you're going to do in each scenario is you're going to tell me which of these 3 things is happening. Is this scenario illustrating movement? Or is it illustrating a shift up? Or is it illustrating a shift down? Shift up means to the right or an increase. Shift down implies to the left or a decrease. So we're told in this scenario there's an outbreak of the flu and the sales of latex gloves skyrocket. So we can assume in here we're looking at a market of latex gloves. What do we suppose is going to happen in that market? If it's movement, that means the price of gloves is changing. It does not say that in the scenario that the price of gloves is changing, so eliminate movement. Your job is to tell me, do you think that's going to increase the demand or decrease the demand for latex gloves? As you go through these scenarios, I will tell you this. There are 2 of the 6 that are just movement. In other words, there's 2 scenarios where all that's changing is the price of the product. The price of the product changing does not mean that the demand shifts. So be very conscious of that. That's an important thing to note. Now it's not number 1, so really it's 2 of the last 5 are movement. Okay? So good luck. Make sure you message me if you have any questions, and see you when we talk about supply.